Nice to see you. So, so I want to talk a little bit about progress, about spiritual progress tonight. I had my first spiritual experience when I was 16. I dedicated my life to awakening when I was 22. I met my guru when I was 31. And then I found what I was looking for. I usually tell people who study with me that it takes about 5 years of studying with me regularly to understand, to get a coherent understanding of the teachings of evolutionary enlightenment. And it takes about 10 years to gain a coherent understanding of what it means to actually live the teachings. And that's all assuming if one sticks with it and stays with the program. When I started on the path, I wanted to make progress from the very beginning. I wanted to arrive at the goal. I wanted to get there. And when I started attending long meditation retreats, I would meet people. For example, before I went to India for the first time, on these meditation retreats, I would meet people who had just come back from India, had spent 10 years in India, 20 years in India. They were hippies. And I could tell by the kind of questions they were asking the meditation teacher that they didn't know much more than I did, even though they'd been doing the spiritual work and practicing meditation very seriously and seeking for enlightenment seriously for maybe 20 years, and had been to India and seen many of the greatest teachers and gurus on the planet at the time. But I could tell by the nature of the questions that they were asking the teacher that they didn't really know more. They didn't seem to know more than I did. And at that time, I wasn't very experienced and didn't know very much. And I wanted to know, why is it possible that some of these people who had been at this for so long don't seem to be progressing? Then one of my own meditation teachers, I used to go to meditation retreats with, who inspired me quite a bit. He was speaking with some of his students because when I finally met my guru when I was 31 and had this very powerful awakening, after which I started teaching immediately. I heard from others that when he heard about it, he told his students a funny story. He said the problem with Andrew is that he was always only interested in enlightenment. He would never just settle into the practice. To repeat, he said the problem with Andrew was he was always only interested in awakening and enlightenment. He would never just settle into the practice, which I thought was the funniest thing I ever heard. And of course, he was right. But I'm very lucky that I did, and that I do, and that I am. But he saw this as my preoccupation with enlightenment was some kind of a problem. He felt it must have been hindering my development in his way of thinking of things. So what I had noticed over those years on many of these meditation retreats is many people seemed to be doing spiritual practice, were engaged in spiritual practice, had been engaged in spiritual practice for years, but more often than not, too many times, didn't seem to be making any progress. Didn't seem to be getting anywhere, arriving in at any fixed point. And the thing is that people like the Buddha and Ramana Maharshi and some of the greatest realizers that we've all heard of all spoke about, in their own words, from their own experience, about enlightenment itself. They were proclaiming that there is a goal to be achieved here, there's a goal to be attained. The Buddha talked about it as the yonder shore. So I just noticed it seems to be a general problem, I think, in progressive spirituality, that many people don't seem to know where they're going or how they're going to get there, but they seem to be on the path somehow, some way. But they're not getting anywhere. They're not getting anywhere. They're not getting anywhere. And if we don't know where we're going, and we don't know how we're going to get there, and we don't intend to arrive anywhere, it makes it all very confusing. And yeah, very confusing. But this is what I wanted to speak about a little bit. Now, I think that progress and whether we make progress is either a matter of it's going to either a matter of being spiritually gifted, as people have some people are gifted musically or gifted in the gift of writing, or gifted in any kind of art form, any kind of capacity. Some people are just gifted to have a gift. Other people aren't as gifted, but they have to work very hard to attain the same measure of competence in that particular field. And I think spiritually, it's also similar. Some people are just more gifted than others. Some people have to work harder to achieve the same results. But there's amongst how this works musically is they've done studies about how many hours do the greatest musicians practice versus people who weren't at the top level. And they found that the greatest musicians were all those individuals who practiced the most. So it seems that those people who make dramatic, extraordinary, profound, and miraculous progress seem to want it more than anybody else. They seem to put more time into achieving that progress, making sure that they get where they want it to go. But this is something important to keep in mind, because also in spiritual practice, of course, we speak a lot about grace, trust, surrender, letting go, and faith, which are all important parts of being on the path, important spiritual capacities to learn how to become masterful and learning how to let go of control. But at the same time, and on the other side of the equation, there is always this matter of how much do I really want this, and how much of my own effort and intention am I really putting into actually succeeding and getting where it is that I want to go. So the bottom line, and what I want to share with you, is that a lot of people think that spiritual experiences, big experiences, powerful experiences, profound experiences, are going to change everything and do all the work for them. That's not really true. Some people have very dramatic spiritual transformative experiences and remain changed forever after as a result. Other people have experienced similar moments of similar profound, miraculous, transformational moments, but don't end up changing very much as a result. Even though both individuals had the same level of intensity of experience, their nervous system was shaken, their mind and soul was shaken with the same level of intensity, except one person seemed to flip into awakening as a result, and the other person didn't seem to make it. So a big factor in how much progress we make has to do with what our relationship to our experience actually is. What is our relationship to our experience? Which means how free we really want to be anyway. How important to us is that we make progress? Is it very important? Is it of the utmost importance that we make progress and that we arrive at the undershore? Often when I speak about the process of spiritual practice and transformation, I try to speak about it like the difference between what happens if you're in an athletic competition. And somebody who intends to become an Olympic athlete and win a gold medal, someone who intends to be an Olympic athlete and win a gold medal in their particular sport, it's obviously taking that desire to win that gold medal very seriously, and their whole life becomes one point to be focused on attaining that gold medal. And we all know that no one's going to win that gold medal without giving it everything they've got. And so if you want to win a gold medal, you have to be willing to put in an awful lot of effort to achieve the kind of transformation we're speaking about. So my point is that transformation and progress don't happen by themselves. We can have spontaneous moments of inner freedom and revelation and insight and ecstasy and clarity and enlightened awareness. These higher states of consciousness only become our own when we're willing to make them and make their attainment an absolute priority in our lives. These kind of experiences, these miraculous transformative experiences, reveal to us what the goal is as a state of consciousness. But if we're an individual who has made progress, that progress needs to be demonstrated if it's going to be believed throughout the challenges of daily life. And the human experience is just difficult and challenging. It's difficult to be an enlightened human being. It's difficult to be a sane human being. It's difficult to be a happy human being. And it's very difficult to be an enlightened human being. So, what if you felt determined to live your life as if you were enlightened, because you know what enlightenment is, because you have tasted it, because you experienced it, because you have known what it means from your own experience, even if you don't experience it in every single moment, you know what it is because you have experienced it. You know what it is because you have experienced it. To repeat, you know what it is because you have experienced it. So because you have experienced it, you have no doubt that it exists. You've experienced it enough times to be convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that enlightenment is real and that it exists. And the way this works is that at a certain point, if you're sincere and if you're serious, at a certain point you say, okay, God, now I'm convinced that enlightenment is real because I've experienced it. And at which point, after how much experience do we get to the point where we can actually lay claim to the enlightenment that we've experienced it? Do we say, now I know, now it's enough. I don't need more. I don't need to be convinced anymore, because now I already am convinced that enlightenment is real. And the reason that this is important, because once you become convinced that enlightenment is real, it presents us with a kind of obligation. Because in these higher states of consciousness, we glimpse or become cognizant of metaphysical laws and principles and values that reveal the true nature of existence to us. They reveal to us what the Buddha called the way, the Tao, the way. The Dharma reveals to us what the way is, the true way of being, the true way of living. And inherent in the true way of living and the true way of being is the revelation of these spiritual principles and these spiritual laws. And these spiritual laws and spiritual principles reveal to us that there is a right way, a true way, a real way, and a wrong way. A way that's not so true, not so simple, not so clear. That's what the way means. So when we're in altered states of consciousness, when we're inspired by the awakening to enlightened awareness, when we are experientially convinced, the way ahead becomes very obvious to us. It becomes obvious to us what the right way is, because we're in touch with it, because we see it, we feel it, we know it. And how much spiritual experience do we need? Does any of us need to become convinced and in touch with what the way is all the time, without needing to necessarily be in an altered state of consciousness to have access to it? For example, I've been saying that it's hard to be a conscious human being. It's very challenging to be a conscious human being. It's much more challenging to be a conscious human being than it is to be an unconscious human being. Because an unconscious human being, in the context in which I'm speaking about it, an unconscious human being doesn't know who they are, they don't know what they're doing, they don't know why they're here. And they're not living according to any higher principles. They're just doing the best they can in a confusing world. But to be a conscious human being means we claim a measure of understanding, we claim a measure of insight, we claim a measure of clarity about these higher principles, about the Dharma, about truth, about enlightenment, about meaning and purpose and inherent value. So when you claim knowledge of what the way is, of these higher virtues, meaning, purpose, and direction and value, etc., then inherent in that declaration is an obligation to be true to this vision of higher purpose, to be true to what the way is, to what the Tao is, to what the truth is, at all times, in all places, at all circumstances, if you can. You have a spiritual. One experiences a spiritual obligation because it's almost like one has, not almost, as though one has literally been. These metaphysical principles have been revealed to one. In other words, there are spiritual laws that have been revealed to us, and now we know it. Now we know that they exist, and they're living principles, they're living virtues, they're living truths. We know that they exist, and in a certain way, we could say they seem to know we exist. So it's an obligation to a higher path, a higher way of being, a more true and authentic way of being. And the question is, at which point in our own spiritual development, in our own progress, spiritual progress, do we get to that point when we are ready to live according to these higher principles, no matter where we are, who we are, or how we feel, or what we think? One example I wanted to share with you is a phrase I've been hearing lately, which goes something like this. It goes, I want you to know it's okay to not be okay. I don't know if you guys have heard this, but it seems to be pretty popular. I want you to know, like this is what you say to your best friend or to your lover, whoever you care about. As an expression of loving compassion, you would say, I want you to know, sweetheart, that it's okay not to be okay. So you give the person permission to not be okay or to be a mess. If they need to be a mess, it's okay to be a mess because I love you anyway. So, what would it be like if you said, sweetheart, I love you, and it's not okay to not be okay, which means because we're suffering, because we're struggling, because we're experiencing fear and confusion and anxiety, it's not okay to fall apart. It's just not okay to give up self-control. It's not okay to give up self-respect and dignity. It's not okay to give up higher principles and higher vision. It's not okay to give up, to repeat higher principles and higher vision. It's not okay to give up and lose touch with the higher perspective just because we don't feel okay, because we feel depressed or lonely or misunderstood or lost in some way. So I think a big sign of spiritual progress, since that's what we're talking about, would be coming to that point in our own development when it's not okay to not be okay. In other words, to be more simple about it, more direct, more clear. It's okay if we feel not okay. It's okay to feel not okay. But it's not okay to act not okay, to become a victim of feeling not okay. Because if you have awakened to enlightened awareness and you know you have If you awaken these higher virtues, these higher principles, you awaken to the Dharma and to the Tao and to the truth. At a certain point, one recognizes that there's an obligation to these kinds of insights, these kinds of revelations of higher truths and higher principles. When you feel a spiritual obligation, a dharmic obligation, a moral obligation, an ethical obligation, a truth obligation to be true to these higher principles, that's when you really start to make progress, everybody. We start making progress when we are true to the highest truths that we know to be true. No matter how we feel, no matter how difficult or challenging our life may be, we still are choosing, we're still choosing, we're still choosing, we're still choosing. Make the effort to be true to the highest truth that we've realized. And if we're really making a lot of progress, we feel we don't have any choice. If we're really making progress, we feel we don't have any choice but to be true to the highest truth that we know, even though we may be personally, relatively in a difficult set of circumstances. We may be personally very challenged, which is okay, which is part of life. That's why I said it's hard to be a conscious human being. It's much harder to be a conscious human being than it is to be an unconscious human being. An unconscious human being is unconscious, so they don't know who they are. They don't know where they are. They don't know why they're here, and they don't know what the hell's going on. So it's much easier to not know what the hell's going on. And you can't be responsible for yourself or for life itself if you don't know what's going on. But if you do know who you are, you do know where you are, you do know why you're here, and you know what's going on here, then you have to be responsible. You have to be willing to be responsible for all that knowledge, which means keeping your act together. So at this point that I'm describing, living a spiritual life becomes an obligation. It becomes an obligation to be true to the truth. It's not something you're doing for yourself anymore. It's something you're doing because you have no choice, because it's living the truth. Living the truth, becoming an expression of the truth, and how we deal with difficulty, frustration, confusion, fear, and anxiety shows how much we actually know about liberation and about the truth itself. So we start to make real progress when our attention shifts from our compulsive, narcissistic, self-obsessed thinking and feeling to a relationship to the challenges of being a conscious human being that are very big-hearted and big-minded and full of big thoughts and spiritual inspiration and love and care for humanity and for sentience and for life and for consciousness and for the universe. When our soul is no longer trapped in our ego, thank goodness. That's when we really begin to make spiritual progress. And people who know you and people who love you will let you know, directly or indirectly, explicitly or implicitly, whether you're living the truth or not, whether you're an expression of the higher truth or whether you're just lost in your own personal drama. Because what is an ugly sight, what is unseemly, and what's an ugly sight is when we claim to be living the spiritual life in earnest, but are as self-obsessed, as narcissistic, as egoically trapped in self-focus, as many people who have no awareness of higher principles. So if you practice the Dharma and feel that you are serious about it, that you're sincere, that you are authentic, that you love God more than you love yourself, then your life and the way that you live it should become an expression of how much you love the absolute principle. It should be obvious to other people who know you that this person is living for higher principles and for living for a higher purpose. Obviously, they love God more than they love themselves. That's why I love them. That's why they're beautiful. That's why that person becomes beautiful to me. They become beautiful because because of their obvious love and care for higher principles. And because of their obvious love and care for higher principles, I feel like this person becomes trustworthy because I can see they're spiritually trustworthy, which means they're living the Dharma, they're living their Dharma, they're living their truth. It's not just what they talk about, but to become who they are, the life they live is the Dharma they speak about. So then that's when we're living according to our own highest principles, helplessly, audaciously, radically, with great commitment. That's when we make serious spiritual progress. So if you're making a really great spiritual progress, you'll understand what I'm saying when I say it's not okay to not be okay, which means, to repeat, it means it's okay to suffer. Not that we want to suffer, but it's okay to suffer. There's nothing wrong about suffering. But we need to suffer in a dignified context. We need to suffer within the context in which we're taking full responsibility for the highest principles and highest truth that we have understood. When the ego suffers in its own context, it's not pretty. When the ego suffers in its own context, gets very ugly and very unwholesome. It's a place and a space pregnant with self-pity and fear and resentment, anger, self-righteousness, and the small self. So I'm not critiquing the nature of suffering itself or the experience of suffering, which is an inescapable part of the human experience. But I'm talking about our relationship to suffering. Because in the end, as I was thinking about giving this talk, I was thinking about it today. In the end, what shows proof positive of our spiritual progress is demonstrated in the relationship we have to our experience. Much more than what the nature of our experience may happen to be in any given moment. The nature of our experience in any given moment could be anything. It could be happiness or sadness, ecstasy or terror. But that's not the point. The point is, what is our relationship to all those extreme feeling states? What is our relationship to this life right now? What is our relationship to the totality of our karmic predicament? What is our relationship to the totality of our karmic predicament? What is your relationship to the totality of your karmic predicament? What's our relationship to the totality of our karmic predicament? That's when you can tell where people are really at. And you can tell if people are making progress if you get to know them. After you get to know somebody for some time, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, you start to see, aha, this person talks a good game, but they don't live it. They're not really trustworthy because they don't walk their talk. They sound good. They seem reasonably intelligent and well-informed, but they are actually cowards because they don't walk their talk. Whereas another person, if you get to know them for 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 years, you start to notice that they are who they appear to be. They say what they do and they do what they say and they mean what they say. And they are who they appear to be. They are making spiritual progress. They demonstrate spiritual progress in their trustworthiness and their authenticity and their truthfulness, their realness, their for realness. So to repeat, I think that whether we're making spiritual progress is much more easily determined by how inspired our relationship to our experience is rather than the nature of what our experience may be in any given moment. Most people don't really care how you feel. Someone says, "How you doing?" Someone says, "How you doing? How are you?" They really want to hear you say, "I'm great." So what we're interested in, if we're spiritually inspired, what we're interested in from each other is this other person spiritually trustworthy? Are they who they appear to be, and are they spiritually trustworthy? That's what matters. So I feel that when we are engaging with each other, we need to take into consideration the fact that the best gift you can give somebody you love is your own well-being. Giving people you love a feeling of confidence that you're okay, that you can take care of yourself, that you're inwardly strong, trustworthy, and reliable, even in the face of your own challenges and your own fears. That's what gives people confidence. So a lot of people think sometimes that that being vulnerable is being able to speak openly about how our egos happens to feel about things. Speaking vulnerably about our ego's fears and our ego's insecurities and our ego's preoccupations. Sharing that kind of stuff with somebody does not make anybody else happy. It's not going to help anybody. It's not going to help you. It doesn't help them. It just creates a breakdown in trust. What will make another person feel good, what will inspire them, is if you can share with that person how your true self feels, which is very doubtless about the love of God. And if you can share how your authentic self feels, which is very positive about what's possible, that's what makes people feel happy. That's what will make them feel good. And they'll feel good because they spent time with you and because you spoke to them from your true self and your authentic self. You transmitted these deeper and higher truths to them through your own awakened personality, and this is uplifting. So what I'm saying is if we assign a spiritual progress is that you don't have to compulsively share your ego's insecurities with other people. It doesn't make any difference. If your ego's having a bad day, that's too bad. If your ego's having a bad day, that's too bad for your ego. But the worst thing you can do is start having to share with your friends, so-called friends, about how bad your ego feels that day. It won't help anybody else, and it's not going to help you. If you're interested in enlightenment, awaken to enlightened awareness, you begin to lose interest in what your ego tells you about reality and how your ego feels about anything. Because you realize in your most enlightened moments that the ego is a liar. The ego is only masquerading as your true self, but it's not your true self. It's a fake, it's a stand-in. It's not who you are, it's not who you are, it's not who you are. So if you keep identifying with the part of you that you have already realized is not who you are, it means you're not a sincere practitioner. If you're very sincere, if you're making real spiritual progress, you stop identifying with the ego. If you're making real spiritual progress, it means you stop identifying with your ego, especially in public. In private, you may feel the need to indulge yourself. If so, then so be it. But The worst thing you can do is indulge your ego in public. That means from a spiritual point of view, you're just not serious because you're still letting your ego complain through your body and mind. You're allowing your ego to use your body and mind as a mouthpiece to express its own discontents. And that's not a healthy or wholesome or any kind of positive or nurturing behavior. So a sign of spiritual progress is that you stop doing that, which is when you stop sharing about how your ego feels. Once again, to repeat, and I know this is very radical stuff, but this is why people call me radical. If you're making spiritual progress, you stop letting your ego complain in public about its discontents. You stop letting your ego tell lies in public about you. And if you're spiritually strong, you're spiritually clear, you're spiritually self-confident, you just don't do that. You just don't do it. You don't let your ego vent. That's why you have to pay therapists so much money, because they have to suffer through this stuff. I guess if you have to suffer through this stuff, it's worth getting paid a lot of money to hear it, because it's painful to listen to the ego's suffering. It's very painful. So if you're making a sign of spiritual progress, is that you stop doing that. Please stop doing that. Please stop doing that. Please, oh, please, please, please stop doing that. All we do is hurt ourselves and hurt each other. Pull each other down into the mud of our own unconsciousness and torment and egoic and existential confusion. Just don't do that. Try not to do that. Try not to do that. Try not to do that. Try to stand up and be strong and to resist at all costs and any cost the temptation to indulge your small self. And that takes a lot of courage and power of renunciation and commitment to God, higher consciousness, the truth, the Dharma, the Tao, the way, higher virtue, sincerity, authenticity, truthfulness, earnestness, and love. So in the end, the true sign of spiritual progress, that you stop indulging your small self. In the end, the clearest and most tangible and most important sign of spiritual progress is you stop indulging your small self. You stop indulging your small self, and you stop indulging your small self. You just don't do it anymore. And if you must, so you may do it in private, but you never do it in public, because you don't want to spread that poison anywhere around you. And if you're someone who's made spiritual progress, you have the spiritual strength not to do that. You keep your ego's fears and your ego's frustrations and complaints and unresolved issues and traumas too. You keep them to yourself. And if you're the real thing, if you are the real thing, what you express is the very opposite of your small self's issues. Love for God, love for the Dharma, love for evolution, love for goodness, truth, and beauty, love for sentience, love for purity, love for earnestness, love for sincerity, love for transparency, love for being real and authentic, love for God, love for each other, love for life. So it's serious, man. It's serious. This is what I'm talking about is really serious, but the path is serious, the way is serious, the Tao is serious, these higher virtues and values are all very serious and real. And it's up to each and every one of us to kind of make all this real by how you choose to be. And every day, every single day, we have infinite choices in relation to everything I'm sharing with you. But it takes courage to renounce the small self. That's how we find happiness and, of course, liberation, by the way. Liberation is the secret on the other side of renunciation of the mind and ego. Liberation is the mystery that we find, the miracle that we find on the other side of renouncing the mind and the ego. And liberation is the revelation of ecstatic positivity that's completely overwhelming to the mind, to the small self, and to everything we've ever known. It's the get out of jail free card. Oh, I didn't know that. I mean, I get out of jail free. That means liberation means your karma gets burnt up. It means liberation means freedom, means your karma gets burned to a crisp. And you didn't even expect it. You didn't know such an amazing thing was possible. You could never even have thought such a thing. And yet you find out, oh my God, it's possible, and I'm so blessed, I'm so grateful. I don't even know how to begin to thank you. I didn't expect it. You can't expect something like that. It's unimaginable in its glory and profundity. And we can have glimpses of this liberation I'm speaking about in the present moment if we can renounce the mind and ego. You can get glimpses of the immaculate nature of liberation itself, unstained and untarnished by our own unenlightened minds and small selves. So it's important to make progress, everybody. It's important that you make progress. It's important that I make progress. Because if I see you making progress, it gives me confidence in the Dharma. If you see that I'm making progress, it gives you confidence in the Dharma because you say, oh, it's working. It's working, it's working, it's working, it's real. Thank goodness, hallelujah. Praise the Lord. Praise Jesus. Thank you so much. I'm so lucky and I'm so grateful the Dharma is real, it works. It's not just it's not a fiction, it's not a made up story. It's real, it's true. It works. Thank you. It works because I can see it in you. If I can see it in you and you can see it in me, then my seeing the progress in you and you seeing the progress in me means we give each other the greatest gift of spiritual self-confidence. Because your progress gives me confidence in my own capacity to make progress. My progress gives you confidence in your own capacity to make progress. Pretty good deal, no? If you're living the Dharma, if you're living the Dharma for real, besides your own liberation, you're living for everyone else's liberation. You're living to see other people wake up and let go and become part of the solution. That's why you're living and breathing. You're not living for any other reason anymore. So to repeat, when you see other people make progress and they see you make progress, it's like a sharing of ecstatic inspiration and positivity. Thank you. Yeah, one thing I wanted to share in this talk, which is this is more in terms of just the teaching. In terms of making progress for each and every one of us, it's very important in your own process and in your own practice, in your own life where you're practicing the Dharma, it's better you move forward taking small steps one after the other, rather than take a big step that you can't live up to. So it's better to take small steps one after the other, rather than take a big step that's too big all at once that you can't live up to. The worst thing anybody can do is take a step back. If you take a step back, you can lose countless lifetimes. I'm just guessing, but it feels like that, of progress. So I always tell people it's better to move forward slowly, one step at a time, than to move forward too quickly and not be able to stick to it. Because if every step forward you take, you have to be willing to stand up for the truth that you're stepping into, which means you have to be willing to embody it, even when it's difficult. And that'll make you strong, reliable, trustworthy, a true exemplar of the Dharma. But it's better to take one small steps forward that you can back up, rather than big steps that you can't back up. But never step back, never step back, never step back, never step back. If you step back, it's like if your ship puts down an anchor. It's like ripping an anchor out of the bottom of the ocean. You lose your spiritual moorings and fall back. It's like falling off a cliff, back into samsara, back into the mind, back into the world, back into karma. It's a terrible thing to do. Most people do that when they get scared and confused. They just rip the anchor out and fall back into the mind and back into the insanity of samsara. To never do that, never do that, never do that, never do that. Remain steady and strong wherever you're at, and then use all of your spiritual effort to take one small step at a time, putting one foot in front of the other, never backing down, never moving too quickly. But be steady, and you have to believe in yourself. You have to believe in the Dharma. You have to believe in the truth itself. Once you embark on this path, never back down. It's the worst mistake you can make, that any of us could ever make. So a sign of progress is when you start feeling, which is in the theme of this talk from the very beginning, is when you start to feel an obligation to be strong. When you feel an obligation, a moral, ethical, spiritually inspired obligation to be strong and true, and high-minded and high thinking. Even when your ego is screaming bloody murder, you don't listen. You don't care. So if you feel the awakening of a kind of a moral or ethical spiritual obligation to be strong, even when your ego is screaming, it's a good sign. It shows that your authentic self is being birthed for real. And that's a real sign of progress. When your authentic self starts to reveal itself, that's the real sign of progress. Because in this teaching, your authentic self is your true self, the only self you ever want to be. Because your authentic self is not really is not being controlled by your karma, by your history, or by anything else than the highest principles in the universe already. And the minute you start to awaken to your authentic self, you start to feel its momentum. At that point, you can start to take your hands off the steering wheel and take your feet off the gas, because it starts happening by itself. It will start happening by itself. What that means is you start happening by itself. You start walking and talking and saying things and thinking things that you haven't thought before. You start spontaneously expressing sanity, divinity, truthfulness, love, kindness, evolutionary ecstasy, spiritual inspiration. It just happens by itself. You don't have to do anything. It just happens by itself. And when it happens by itself, then you know who you really are. You're not the old self anymore. You're not the small self anymore. Now the authentic self is coming alive in you. And then that's when you begin to understand everything directly. And then you realize it was all worth it. No matter how hard it was, no matter how challenging it was all worth it. And then all you feel is gratitude and inspiration. Let us all make great progress. together. I'll make progress to inspire you, and you make progress to inspire me, and we can inspire each other. And I also think in terms of spiritual community, spiritual sangha, a big part of the significant spiritual brotherhood and sisterhood, spiritual sangha, spiritual partnership, is we're here to not only to support each other on the path, but to inspire each other, to be exemplars for each other, and to keep our eye on each other. Because if you're watching me and I'm watching you, I have to be at my best because you're watching me. And if I'm watching you, you have to do your best because I'm watching you, and you know it. My first guru, Swami Hariharananda Giri, used to say, the idle mind is the devil's workshop. So it's good to know that people who care about your highest potentials are watching you. As unpleasant as that might be. Because when the ego knows nobody's looking, it gets up into all kinds of trouble. When you know your spiritual friends have your back and they want your liberation maybe more than you do, and having their attention on you is a great gift. Just like having your attention on them, it's a great gift back to them. So another sign of spiritual progress is appreciating the significance of the care from other people for our welfare, for our spiritual progress. And your care for my spiritual progress is a great gift, as is my care for your spiritual progress. And I've seen how this works in real life, is that when people who care about the promise of enlightenment more than they care about anything else, they're very attentive to other people. They begin to care about other people's evolution in a very egoless way. It's part of waking up to that's part of awakening to the authentic self. And the way that I'm speaking about it is that when it starts happening automatically, you start caring automatically also about the welfare of other people. So many good things can come from all this, as I'm sure you're well aware. So please care for my progress, and I'll care for your progress. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer.
So if you have questions, please write them in the chat box, and then I will read them out loud. And we have the first question or comment from Ananda. And she was writing it when you were talking about not putting out all the ego's feelings. So she is saying, I disagree. My experience is people who play this way have their ego run things quietly. By exposing, we can become free, at least for women. Not indulge, but reveal and clear.
Whatever works.
I'm happy to hear that it's not a dogma. Yeah, whatever works.
Well, if you get to know me well, you probably find that it is a dogma.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm interested in how awakening runs through the feminine system in a healthy way. Like if we're really playing plan B, my experience is even professionally, we need to have feedback from other people and to reveal our minds in confidence, and to that purification happens together. And so holding everything inside for myself to deal with, I mean, my experience of that is that like men end up like in shame and denial and blame. And women just kind of take stuff on. There's just so many things that happen underground unless we can have that kind of transparent exchange. So maybe it's just either I'm just not at the level you are, or we just have different ways. But I grew up with the way that you talk about, and there was just a whole underground of it wasn't pleasant. It's not pleasant.
No, I can understand. I understand what you're saying, and obviously, it's what one could take what I'm suggesting and practice it in a destructive way, in which would just be a kind of repression rather than a liberation. And I think that happens a lot in the name of spiritual absolutism. So I understand what you're saying, and I don't think you're wrong. But it's not what I'm pointing to. I'm saying that I'm saying, Ananda, that at the deepest level, and this is only for very highly developed practitioners. Most people can't do what I'm actually describing. But what I am advocating, what I'm saying is that for people who are practicing at a very high level, we don't need to indulge the ego's confusion, fears, and suspicions in order to transcend them. It's just not necessary.
Yeah.
Because at a certain point, if the ego as an entity has been if it's been transcended to a significant degree and it's real and authentic, a different kind of intersubjective world space emerges between the people involved that is overwhelmed with love and trust and positive intentions, that takes care of a lot of what you're speaking about without even having to speak about it. But I want to honor what you're bringing up, because what you're saying is you're not wrong, and that a lot of people do need to put all this stuff on the table, unfortunately, to kind of get it out of the way and clear the air and say what needs to be said in order to kind of get beyond it. And so I know there's a place for that kind of thing, and I know people find it helpful. It clears the air and clarifies the space and gives people a feeling of trust and honesty and all that. I get safety. Yeah, I appreciate that, but I'm talking about something more rarefied.
Yeah, I hear
you. It becomes possible.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful.
Very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's my experience of those kind of things emerge when people are working together in a mission-based way. So, I guess in the path that I've, been in most of my life, I think, or half of my life of Bhakti Yoga, we're living for the upliftment of consciousness on the planet, and all eggs are in that basket. And so when we're focused on our service, then every conversation is the context of that. And so I very much experience what you're talking about in that context. And I've seen some of your mature grown-up students who've graduated, and they're very impressive. So I'm attracted to what you're talking about. It's just that I get stuck in the feeling unsafe part sometimes.
It's good just to be aware of these distinctions, and all's good.
Okay. Well, I think that maybe it's just then, maybe it's a progression, and then honoring my process, like step by step, just not ignoring.
Exactly.
And not ignoring my level with this emotional level of safety stuff, and then continuing to serve and become free through that.
Yeah, and also continuing to explore the edges of what it means for you to go beyond it also.
Yes, exactly. I am. Yes, exactly.
Very
it's
good.
Just that, but it's just that, like right now, where I'm finding a lot of, well, not the only place I find juice, but one of the places is when teachers who are like holding, that responsibility for people come together and they drop it, and they let a fuller expression of themselves come out while holding, all the levels together. And I find that to be really beautiful and edgy. So
It's a little bit disappointing too, huh?
not for me, no, not after everything I've seen already that's like, behind. No, I'm very happy with this personally. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I hear what you're saying, but I think we can do better.
I hear that. I hear that. Yeah, I'm open.
Good.
Thanks.
Stay open. Good, good, good.
Then Stefan is saying, hello, Andrew. I have no question, but really want to thank you from the heart for your beautiful and most inspiring talk.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you very much.
And otherwise, I don't have more questions right now.
Okay. Well, I feel very satisfied. I feel I really got the message across tonight. I feel very grateful for your listening, and I feel that more than I intended to share got shared in a way that I felt feels very powerful. So thank you all for that. Thank you, everybody.